and welcome. Greetings, everybody. I'm very excited to have this conversation as well. And let's get right to it. So I want to say before I bring up our next guest that is, by the way, I'll just do it this way. Our guest is going to be today Dr. Joshua M. Myers, who, among many other things, is an associate professor of Africana Studies in the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. He is the author of today's subject of Black Study. He is also author of Cedric Robinson, The Time of the Black Radical Tradition in 2021. And We Are Worth Fighting For, A History of the Howard University Student Protest of 1989 that came out in 2019, and that you can see us in discussion with my former colleague at Morgan State, Dr. Jelani Favors. The videos at imixwhatilike.org. Check that out. And he's also the editor of A Gathering Together, a literary journal. But I want to say before I bring him up here that in addition to all of that, it's perfectly telling that as I was making the error in the initial live a couple of hours ago and reaching out to him, that Dr. Myers was in a class, and that being somewhat familiar as I am with academic life at an HBCU, it is not uncommon for, regardless of tenure or rank or seniority or whatever your position is, that after any amount of years that you might be, as I'm not sure is the case with him, but it's certainly the case with me and many others, teaching a 4-4 or maybe a 3-3, that is 4 courses per semester, if you're not familiar with that, which is a very heavy course load, I think, and indicative of a situation that is not encouraging to a quality of in-classroom teaching experience for both the student or the faculty, or the outside of the classroom production of knowledge, as is the case with the work we're talking about today. So I wanted to take a quick moment to just add a little additional praise, regardless of what I may think of the book, what I may or may not understand of the book, or what anyone else might feel. I think it is a profound accomplishment for anyone, particularly coming out of an HBCU with those conditions. And there are many others that work against this level of production, some of which I think we'll talk about today, that makes this work. And as much as I've been able to read it and understand and grapple with it, it is, I think, monumental and profoundly impressive. So I just wanted to say all that to before I do, as I am now, bring Dr. Myers up to talk about this new book of Black Study. Professor Myers, welcome to the program once again, and thank you very much. And again, congratulations, my man. Very impressive what you've done here. And oh, my bad, let me unmute you.
I got it. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like, we go back all the way to my undergrad years at Howard. Probably don't. I'm sure you do remember.
No, I remember
several times to speak on campus. So it's like really interesting. I posted the screenshot of the YouTube for this conversation, and my current students is like, Can you bring Jared Ball to Howard? It's like, of course I can.
Of course you can. Anytime, it would be an honor, and I appreciate that anyone there would want me to come through. So thank you. No, we do. I didn't want to. I figured some of it would come up. We do go back a little bit, and I wanted to actually make this point that we do go back, but I think it's fair to say that and I want to add this, not to praise the gap or whatever, or the difference or the different locations or whatever, but to emphasize this for the point I'm trying to make about the quality of the work and what I think about what you've done here, that we're not the best of friends. We're not in the same cliques.
Right.
Not, we know each other. We in the same circles, where, whatever, but, so it's not like, so I say that to say, like, when I'm saying all of this, I don't want anybody to think, oh, he's just, bigging up his boy. I mean, I consider you a friend. I consider you a comrade and someone, whatever. But I just want to make that clear.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm profoundly impressed with what you've done here. And again, especially, it would be dope even outside, even if you had a none and was making 10 times your salary like some and produced this, it would be impressive. But and again, I'm not in your pockets, I'm not in your schedule, but what I think I understand of the HBCU experience, to have done this is, I can't get over how impressed I am by it. So congratulations.
Thank you so much for that. And thanks for acknowledging that. I'm sitting in my office right now, third floor of Founders Library, hoping that nobody knocks on my door trying to get registered or come in, with issues. Because one of the things that we have to, as you know, one of the things that we do is not only do we teach, we also have to engage students beyond the classroom. And that's constantly happening.
That's right.
If I wasn't doing this, I would be meeting with students, talking through ideas, but also talking through what they're going through at Howard. Right now, Howard is in an interesting place, and particularly for students who want to engage radicalism. It's scary and hard, and they don't know how to think. They don't know what to do with the fact that Howard now is getting $90 million from the Department of Defense, right? It's like, should we do something? What should we do? Like, how is this going to affect my education, right? Because the Howard that they were sold is not necessarily that Howard, right? And so they get here and they experience levels of conservatism, and they experience levels of, the black bourgeois agenda, whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, they call it Black excellence now, right?
It's nice rebranding of it, though. It's nice, right?
The DoD is the logical extension of Black excellence. We can now be excellent militarisms. We have excellent militarism. Anyway.
Yeah, man.
We become in Black studies, even at the HBCU, an oasis for these students. And so I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, I told the event, we had a launch event last Thursday. I said, I love writing. I love doing, that kind of work, right? But that's not why I'm a professor. It's not why I come to the university. In fact, I didn't get any support materially for this book from the university. Right? The university for me is you, students, right? And so not only do I have to teach, it's the only reason I stay is to teach. I could be doing any other thing and making the same amount of money probably, right? But it's the students. It's the students.
I'm sorry to laugh at that, but yeah, that's a funny way of putting it. I could be doing so many things. I could be doing for the same money, man. It's crazy.
I told my students I would rather be on a farm, like doing food security work, whatever. Like, but the fact that I get to teach y'all is really it's the only way. It's the only reason, in fact, I deal with all the other stuff that I deal with. It's because there's a beauty in being in community with students who are looking for a thing and then realizing why am I not getting that thing until I get into these kind of spaces.
So I did, as I said off air, I wanted to give you a chance to I like to let folks just take a moment to explain their book as they see it. But I'm very tempted to ask you to do it in light of what we were just starting with, a question that I wanted you to ask, to respond to, that you bring up out of chronology so forgive me, but you bring up this distinction, as I'm seeing it, and correct me, between the Black university and the HBCU. So as you, I don't know, is there a way, and maybe we could just separate the two and you could just talk about the book and we can come to that question later. But I was just thinking if there's a way to respond to that distinction as a way of explaining what you see your book doing. But either way, however you want to do it, I
think that's a lovely way to enter into the conversation, because we're being cited at the university, like that says something about the approach to knowledge, right? That the university is organized around. It's not just that, there's a natural order of knowledge that just was always there, and then the universities, just apply that natural order to reality, right? But it assumes that it does. And every intellectual or academic area assumes that there is a natural order. But Blackness reveals that the natural order is unnatural. And we see that in broad relief when it comes to the distinctions that you just raised, right? When Black students come into Black institutions, they find it wanting because there is no natural order. And my reality, my experience as a Black person reveals that there is no natural order. And so how do we get our university education to be relevant to the world that we see, to the world that we experience? And at HBCUs, that conversation happens almost immediately. But those people that are carrying that conversation are punished for having that conversation at HBCUs, right? You know, there's a legacy of discipline and punish, if you will, when it comes to us thinking beyond disciplines. The disciplines that we inherited, the disciplines that we reify sometimes, the disciplines that we think that we can't fight. And so the relationship between that and the book is that part of the energy around Black studies is that we need a separate institution, or we need a radically changed institution in order for any of this to work. And when Black studies emerges and it has this life that it has over the last almost 60 years, one of the reasons that we often fail at doing what we want to do in Black studies is because Black studies wasn't just supposed to be a department, wasn't just supposed to be a discipline, wasn't just supposed to be this space that kind of accepted the norms of the academy as its own with Blackface, right? And so this book is about getting back to the deeper questions that were raised, not only in that moment, but in other moments that said, we need to rethink knowledge itself. We need to rethink the structure of knowledge. We need to rethink the emergence of these spaces that we think are told are natural. Because when we actually think about our Black lives, it reveals that these spaces come out of particular conditions. And in fact, it reveals that the university as a construct was really created in order to discipline Black life. In fact, discipline all life, but certainly discipline Black life. And so the contradictions that we think that exist between a university like Howard or any HBCU where Black excellence gets framed or prioritized over Black liberation may not be so much a contradiction, because these universities aren't really concerned about our liberation. They never were. And maybe Black excellence is the actual mission. And so maybe it's not so much the contradiction that we think it is. Studying Black life in the ways that the peoples that I talk about in the book study Black life help us see in that way, gives us clarity in that way, so that we don't have, we don't have to be disappointed anymore. We can just continue to do our work and figure out, how to destroy it all at some point, how to dismantle it all at some point. But certainly we don't get to be seduced anymore when we think with people like Sylvia Winter or W.E.B. Du Bois about the structure of knowledge, not just whether or not Black life can fit into the pre-existing categories.
So so again, I want to point out that if at any point you feel like, first of all, I don't know exactly how we are on time, so always just let me know whenever we gotta start thinking about wrapping up or whatever. I'm here to.
I'm good to about 3:30, so we're good.
Oh, okay, right. So I might have to go before you, unfortunately. But
yeah.
But I want to say again, I've already asked you off air. I want this to be part one of a discussion, because as I was saying, I've read as much as I could, as fast as I could, but it deserves so much more attention that, I've already redesigned my semester, and two of my 4 classes are going to be using this text intimately all semester. So
I'd like to be able to.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd like to come back to, later, after a greater chance to get into it. But you mentioned, that we go back a little bit. So, and I know you remember the WPFW, shout out to WPFW and our Cruise Hate Awards. And let me be perfectly honest with you and everybody. Reading as much as I have, I went back and forth from the hateful grinning to honestly getting tearful, man. Like selfishly thinking about my own experience at Morgan, like the whole midlife, mid-career crisis, all this stuff. Students coming to me just this week after class wanting to talk about what is going on. And in reading this, I'm like, damn, but the hateful part, I'm like, it feels like with each chapter, you are asking us to reconsider not only the people being considered, but what other people have been doing with them and their images and their arguments. I mean, So before we get to any of the specifics of the people, or unless you want to, do that with any example, whatever, could you talk a little bit about that general concern that seems to thread through the work it's yeah. And I'll just stop there.
So I think we have, among, I guess you can call them the current or modern day Black academic, we have avatars a lot for the things that we think that we're doing. And so, which is what you do when you don't feel that your place may be natural to the functioning of the place, right? And so you find someone who you think justifies your existence in that particular place. But you can only make these peoples into the avatar if you assume that their goals were the same as yours. And so I have a problem when Du Bois, for me, is at best a radical historian who breaks a lot of the consensus around certain moments in our conception of not only the United States of America, but Pan-Africanism. It becomes a problem for me when he becomes the person who justifies whether or not Black people belong in the discipline of sociology or not. That's all you got? So, but, I moved away from the hate into why this is happening, right? And I think, part of what is happening is there's this attempt to create a space in sociology to interrogate race, to interrogate the nature of inequality that's attached to race, which is not unlike what sociology has been doing for several years, in fact, maybe 100 years or so. But in doing so, the notion that sociology can break us out of that or liberate us from that, I think gets inscribed in some of the logics. And to me, that ain't what Du Bois is trying to do. He's not trying to say sociology is a liberatory force for Black people. Right? And beyond that, the other move that I made, is basically demonstrating why these disciplines not only can't be liberatory forces, but in fact do the opposite. They work against our liberation. And it's Du Bois's recognition of that, right, that I think is more important than whatever contributions he made to those particular disciplines. He eventually makes somewhat of a break. The word that I use is hesitance. He's hesitant before these spaces, right? Sylvia
and I
Winter,
love what you do with
Jacob
that too, by the way. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Sylvia Winter, Jacob Carruthers, and Cedric Robinson make more complete breaks than Du Bois is able to make from these disciplinary areas. And so I think the fear around it is, if I break from the discipline, I can't think anymore. I can't work anymore. I can't do the things that I want. And what I wanted to show folks is actually in the break, there's another side, right? After the break, there is Africa for Du Bois. After the break, there is a different conversation for Sylvia Winter that is rooted in a way of thinking and being that actually resonates with more people that we think that we are aligned with, which is our people, right? And so Black studies methodologically, right? Even if you want to say methodologically, in fact, earlier in class, I was saying poetically. You don't have to use methodology or research, right? It's a way of speaking. It's a way of knowing that relates us to things that matter to us, right? It relates us back to who we are, but not just as scholars, but as Black people who live in Black communities, who work alongside Black communities, who are trying to survive like every other Black person, right? To me, that becomes not only the mission for scholars, it's the mission for our teaching, because everybody that we teach ain't gonna become a scholar. And so I'm not wasting my time trying to teach y'all research methodology that will make you tenurable. I'm not doing that anymore. I want to teach in a way that allows you to relate to our people or relate back to our people in ways that those other areas that you're taking in university just cannot do. That's really where this approach comes from. And I think, I don't want to get into the notion that, these are the only scholars, the ones that I talk about that were doing this kind of work. But these were the ones that resonated for me in the time that I was grappling through this as not only a research scholar, but also as someone who was teaching Black students.
Right on. Oh man. So speaking of the people that you talk about, just very quickly, you start with June Jordan. As you mentioned, you talk about Du Bois, Sylvia Winter, Jacob Carruthers, Cedric Robinson, and conclude with Tony Cade Bambara. In the beginning, in the intro, when you're talking about June Jordan, and I'd like you to say, obviously, as much as you'd like to about this or anything else, but you mentioned, or you refer to the lies, that they lied, that there are lies, that there are traditions, and then that there is a tradition of recognizing the lie.
Yes.
That you're talking about in this book. So to the extent you haven't already covered this, say a word or two about what it is you're saying there, and how does June Jordan figure into this tradition of exploding the lies?
Yeah. So I do a kind of play in that chapter on the words lie and life and living. And it comes from June's own words. So the lying part comes out of her essay, Black Studies, Bringing Back the Person, 1969, written in the heat of the Black student movement at City College. She's saying that these students are tired of the lies, and that's why they're doing what they're doing, right? But I think a year earlier, around the same year, she writes what she calls, she writes about what she calls life. And she says that what we're really talking about with Black studies is life studies. And so what does it mean to sustain life? And so I kind of play around those particular things, but or those ideas. But I think June is at the center of so much of this, because as a poet who is connected to this impulse to explode, but also to emerge in a new way. Like there's this renewal and this attempt to, not just an attempt, the ability to reframe by using the poetic, that I think allows us, to really clear space, right? Because that's so much what's happening, right? When it comes to Black studies, my students come into the class and now they feel that they have space to expand and think differently and actually engage in ideas without the fear of being marginalized within a particular space, or without the fear of being disciplined, right? I think that word discipline is really the word for a reason. People get disciplined when they step outside of the boundaries of academic discipline. And how do you discipline a poet? You really can't. Not a poet that understands the poetic in the way that June Jordan understands what the poetic does. And so I wanted to start there. I wanted to start with an artist, a poet, someone who actually taught Black studies in that way, to really clear space for us to consider what comes next in the book. And, the idea of using June Jordan really comes out of me thinking about the fact that she was colleagues in a Black studies program with Tony Cade, who I also talk about in the conclusion, with Addison Gale, with Adrienne Rich, with Audre Lorde, right? And so many others. And it made me imagine, well, what were the conversations like in that moment? And so we have the archives and we have glimpses and we have the articles. And Connor Reed has written a new book called New York Liberation School, where he deals with it, right? But I was just imagining, like, all right, when these artists and these writers get together, what are they thinking about Black studies? Because I know for sure it ain't what we're talking about in Black studies now. And so I wanted to imagine that.
So I'm not sure. Let me come back to that. Let me come. I want to. I keep. There's so many tributaries that are tempting here. So you keep mentioning poetry. So it just caught my attention that it makes perfect sense then that you would have an accolade, introductory praise from E. Ethelbert Miller, saying at the book that your book is a blueprint manual that helps to elevate the Black imagination so that a new architecture can create a better world. And I mean, I think that is a really perfect description of what you're doing here and what is so impressive and inviting about the work. Anyway, so I do want to come back to that point though about what you have to say in here about disciplines, and I can't help it. I got a bad joke in here because you have a line at one point. You say something about being inside or outside the gates of the university, and I couldn't help but thinking inside and outside the Henry Louis gates. I was because there is this projection of what this field or the history of Black thought is, and then what you're saying, nah, man, there's something else going on here that we're not doing or we're not able to do. We're disciplined out of doing.
Yeah.
you say something about the university in that introductory section with about June Jordan. The university forces them under. Were you in my notes? I quoted that. Are you quoting her, or were you saying that? And just if you would say something more about where that line is coming from. Yeah. Anyway,
so the notion of gates, right? The idea of gates comes out of the writing of June Jordan, and it's more than just a metaphor, right? Universities are highly policed. Like the physical plant of universities are highly policed all around this country. And it's literally an enforcement, right, of this boundary, right? There's certain people who they mean to keep out. And when Jordan talks about that Black and Puerto Rican incursion on the gates, right? That's just not, those aren't just people who are happy to be there. Thank you for letting us in. I think a lot of us are just happy to be where we are. Oh my God, they gave me tenure. Thank you. As if as if you didn't work for it, right? And it's and I'm sure you've probably experienced this before. Like, there are a lot of Black academics that enjoy the violence of being an academic. Not the liberatory part. They enjoy the violent part. I'm gonna take these students through this book. I'm gonna mark up their papers. I'm gonna break them. I'm gonna make. It's like, wait a minute, you enjoy the violence. They enjoy the politics of being in a department where you're hazing students or hazing young faculty. And I'm like, what have we done? What have we done when our relationship to knowledge within Black spaces too, within Black people in departments, is one where you enjoy the violent part. And we're trying to break through, right? And we're trying to break through the violence of Black studies. And sometimes we enjoy the violent part. We enjoy the gates. We enjoy the fact that there are boundaries. Look how people are responding to this AP African American Studies issue in Florida. They are reifying the notion that this is good research. I'm like, this is not an intellectual fight they're waging. It doesn't matter if it's good research, and what in fact is good research, right? And so I just want to say that because these gates and discipline go together, like, and so the idea of being forced under, right? The people who decide, that they're going to open, they're not going to be gatekeepers. In fact, that they're going to allow others into the space, and they're going to take people out of the space, which I think is more important, right? I think the notion of being forced under is how we are then, or they are then, disciplined for not believing in the gates. And so that comes not only from June, it comes from Fred Moten talking about the undercommons, this notion of being doubly marginalized because not only of race and class and gender and things of that nature, but also being marginalized because you're refusing to adhere to the model of excellence that will get people to maybe not think twice about your race, gender, or class. Right? We get forced under. We get, literally given, I'm being forced under right now at Howard. I'm given a class schedule that I didn't agree to, right? So, I mean, is it because of my ideas or is it because of general incompetency? I don't know. I still can't figure it out. But I know that, this isn't normal. This isn't normal for someone to experience. The marginalization isn't normal. I talked about this at Sankofa, right? And when I say this, I'm not asking them to recognize it, but I'm saying no one at Howard in the PR department, in the provost office, has ever mentioned that I've ever written a book. That's what we mean by forced under. And so, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I do want to echo one of the many things that you've said. I want to echo class schedules are violence. It is an act of violence. Class scheduling is psychological warfare. It's all kinds of different kinds of other warfare. It's abusive. And
I think people render that abuse normative, right? What they would say is, well, I went through it, and so you got to go through it, as if somehow the thing no, it's not normative. People make decisions about the abuse. And I think that's something that we need to really understand. Administrative logics are what they are because they are disciplinary logics. This is about consent. This is, in my case, is often about making sure I say the right things in public, right? And so I understand what it's about.
And even online.
People who are who are aligned, but also aware of the violence of these administrative logics, who make different decisions, you know?
Yeah, that's yeah. Again, why I'm thoroughly impressed with what you've done here. All right, let me just move on a little bit, and we can double back to whatever that you'd like to, or that we can work in. And again, I intend for this to be at least part one of whatever, but at least just part one of whatever. I did skip ahead to Sylvia Winter's section because I'm fascinated by her work. I do not pretend to be able to intellectually keep up with her work, like a number of people that you know, whether it's Fred Moulton. I mean, you make a number. I mean, it could be any of the people that you mentioned. You know,
Yeah.
Cedric Robinson, any of them. But there's something about the vibe that, even if I don't fully understand, there is this vibe that I get from Winter and others that I'm just like, I just love it. And the very introductory epigraph that you have in her, the psychological subjugation of the conquered peoples would be ensured by the pen and the printing press, as their physical subjugation had been assured by the gun.
Yeah.
So
you talked about crying, right? Being moved to tears. That's what Winter does for me.
Word. Yeah, I hear you. So talk about why you selected that, what that represents for what you're doing in the chapter, or what Winter represents for what you're doing with this work. But the pen and the printing press, I was like, that's it. Violence. Anyway, why is that atop that chapter?
That is from her book, unpublished as of now, Black Metamorphosis. And when it's published, I really look forward to seeing how people respond to it. I hope people don't shy away from it, because it is lengthy. In manuscript, it's over 900 pages. I don't know how that's going to translate into the text. But
that's all right. People read, like, you know, Stephen King novels and all this other stuff. They can make it through.
It's true. But I think part of the reason publishers rejected it in the 70s when it was written is like, we don't know what to do about this. I mean, so anyway, that book really establishes something that I think is critical to our understanding of not only race and class and Marxism and all of the things that she interrogates, right? It offers something critical in terms of our understanding of how this whole systemic order or political order actually comes into existence. She brings race in at a point where a lot of people don't bring race in, right? And that is at the creation of not necessarily finance capitalism, which some people rightfully start with, but at the creation of the conceit that human beings can have knowledge that orders the world. Race is in at that point, right? And so if race is in at that particular point, then it causes us to really question what is happening with the intellectual development of Western knowledges, right? It's already racialized, which means that it's doing the same violence that the enslaver is doing with the gun, right? It's inescapable. In fact, not only that, right? It stabilizes that intellectual project in really profound ways. Like the racialization piece stabilizes it. It gives it a coherence that then allows for political order to be justified, theorized, right? Developed. It allows for economic order to be theorized, justified, developed, so on and so forth. And so it just so happens that these are the social science disciplines that are supposed to save us, right? No, they're already based on this, right? This racialized particular system. And that particular quote is given at a moment in the book, it's at the beginning of Black Metamorphosis, where she's actually rooting this, not in the English, like, philosophical tradition, which most of us are trained in and taught to begin with, right? She's going back to the Spanish tradition, which is very interesting because she, gets some of her degrees in Spanish, and she teaches Spanish at UWI, University of West Indies. And so there's this point where she's linking this to Spanish philosophy, Spanish theology, and the Spanish attempt to, as she says, de-God, right, the political process. That de-godding, meaning to take religious authority off the table, creates a new authority, and that new authority sees itself as the authority because it's looking at itself in relationship to the people that they are enslaving. That's her work.
All right. That's why I said I'm slow with it. I'm gonna have to come back to it. That's what I'm saying. I have. Again,
but the thing is, she did it in 900 plus pages. I tried to do it in like 2 minutes.
I hear you. So selfishly, I did want to ask you about, because the other day, in this back and forth that I'm having, at least by myself, between the African-centered or Afrocentric world and the so-called Marxist or materialist worlds or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think, let me mute. I think my mic is, now we're getting feedback from your mic. Hold on. Let me.
My mic? I need to put in headphones?
If you do have them, that would help, but it just started. So now I think it's not, I'm not hearing it now. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, It might be my input. But my point is that what my fundamental issue is not to say that African-centered thought or African people need Marx. It's to say that the critiques of Marx often don't seem to accurately describe Marx, A, and more importantly for me, B, don't appreciate enough what Africans have done working with or improving upon or struggling against Marx's ideas. So it's not to say let's hold him up. It's to say let's at least acknowledge. So when I read that part that you have in here from quoting Winter, talking about her own early engagement with Marxism, and the quote ends with her saying, it was not a matter of negating the Marxian paradigm, but of realizing that it was one aspect of something that was larger.
Right.
Am I interpreting that correctly or fairly to say that she or I'm in agreement with her that we don't need to get rid of Marx? We don't need to be dismissive of Marx. We can elevate from Marx, and we have elevated from Marx, and that itself can be appreciated. Or am I wrong in that? Go ahead.
No, yeah. She. I mean, I have a transcript, another transcript that I quote from earlier, that hopefully at some point I can get permission to publish or have somebody else publish as well, where she's actually working through this in even more detail. But she's working through it in conversation and in tribute to C.L.R. James. So she's one of the most important interpreters of the work of C.L.R. James, and so I'll use him as an example, right? C.L.R. James is able to take Marxian thought, Marxian tradition, and do something different with it, right? He is not disciplined by it, in other words. Sylvia Winter, similarly, is not disciplined by it. And so for me, in my own work, in my own thinking, this notion of a paradigm or this notion of a theory only becomes problematic when it's read through as a disciplining theory or a disciplining paradigm. And I think what you explain is that, or what you would just explain or mention in terms of people using it to do things differently, to me is how we should think about it, right? It's almost, not almost, it's grounded in so many different people's creative and generative intellectual work that is in conversation with, but also in conversation beyond it. And I'll just use an anecdote that I always use to answer this particular question. Most people think I would kind of go to Cedric Robinson on it, but I go to Sylvia Hill, who, longtime activist and, ends up coming into the academy as well. I was interviewing her for Black Power Chronicles, and I think this is actually online now, it's on YouTube. And I sort of asked her what her relationship to C.L.R. James was, because as many people might not know or might know, that they were involved in organizing the 6th Pan-African Congress here in DC. And so I was trying to probe C.L.R. James, and then, the whole question of, were y'all reading Marx, were y'all reading Hegel, so on and so forth. And she says, of course you were. We had to at that point, right? And then I followed up saying, well, how does it, relate to some of these later discourses? And she sort of like pauses and she says, if anything, this is a direct quote. She says, if anything, we were cabralists. And that sort of like opened up something for me. It opened me up again to the possibility of thinking around these notions of theorists and these notions of paradigms as existing also alongside, but also existing as their own things as well, right? What if we said we're cabralists? How does that then transform like what's underneath that theoretical contribution? And so I think that's how we should probably think about it. But another way that I think we should think about it is a lot of this happens in and through people who are organizers and intellectuals, right? There's a moment where Marxist thought clarifies things. And that moment is often when we are turned away from access to something that we think we are owed. Right? And so to be very frank, I think most of us become radical in that sense because we have expectations of actually living through and benefiting from the liberal order that we all grew up in. And when those expectations are dashed, we come away looking for explanations. And there's Marxism and socialist thought, radical thought in general, offering but offering an explanation that makes a lot of sense to us in that particular moment. And this is what happens with Winter. This is what happens with Cedric Robinson. This is what happens with so many others, right? And so the only real distinction that I would draw between that moment of realization and what happens to generate a kind of African-centered critique is there are many people who said at that moment of breaking from the liberal order and embracing the socialist order was not enough for me. I needed to find another foundation, another grounds for thinking. And to sort of think about it in that way, maybe you don't get there, however, without coming through a kind of Western radical tradition. Maybe that doesn't appear to you if you don't go through, as you say, that Marxian break too. That's kind of how I think about it.
All right, right on. Okay. So I do want to ask, so, okay, in your section about Du Bois, and anything, if there's more you wanted to say about Sylvia Winter, please do. Okay. In fact, I did want to ask you about when you make reference man, so this is the issue. Let me just share this is my messed up method here. Like, your publisher was kind enough to send me a PDF. I didn't realize until too late or later than it should have been that is a protected PDF, and I cannot make my notes on it and highlights and scribble on it and do what I like to do. So I did what I was going to do anyway and bought at least the Kindle version. So, so I have a purchased copy. I want to support the work anyway, but so my notes are not synced up. So for instance, I've scribbled where I was not able to write it and highlight it on the PDF, something about she's saying something about liberal ontologies. And if I'm remembering, it's something about what I think is something I wanted to ask you about in terms of your chapter on Du Bois as well, which a featured theme is, again, what I said earlier, that there are people doing things with these people's ideas that don't really work when you look at what these people were saying themselves. And my word is frustrating. But so am I getting that reference right? When I can't find it fast enough now. I don't want to be,
liberal ontology.
Yeah, that was the phrase I wrote down. So let me, I'm gonna try to find it real quick on the thing.
I don't recall offhand.
So nope, I'm already wrong. So I must have done something wrong. It's not coming up in the search. Ontolo. Anyway, my bad, man. My bad. So I don't know what I was writing there, or what I was saying. So anyway, so I'll just go back to my original that broader question, and we can, unless there's something you want to say about Sylvia Winter. I did want to ask you about what you were saying in terms of Du Bois and this you even had some good wording for this too. I'm not doing this justice. I gotta say right here, man. Hold on a second. Oh man, you had a really good phrase. Anyway, there's something hesitance. I can ask you about that. But Obama ignoring his radicalism and connecting him to the normative logics of American exceptionalism. Boom. That was one phrase I wrote down.
Yeah.
Like we have Obama because we had Du Bois,
right.
or something like that.
And that's just not me coming up with that out of my head. I've heard it. And
Oh, I know.
I've also written it. Jelani Cobb has written that. There's also another book called From Du Bois to Obama, Charles Banner Haley. And so this is not just me imagining that. People have actually done it. And it was weird. That's the best way I can put it. It was weird to be a graduate student in the Obama era. The optimism of that moment.
Man. Oh man.
Because that optimism filtered through the academy. And I'm like, you have to really ignore the Wall Street bailout, Occupy Wall Street, the response. You got to ignore so much. And it's sad that Black violence is what breaks people out of it, right? Trayvon Martin's murder, and, it's sad that it took all that, I'm sitting, another Howard story. I'm sitting, when I was in grad school, I had to come back to Howard a lot because sometimes Temple felt just, Anyway, I'm sitting at Howard. You might actually been there. This is the ASCAC conference, 2011.
Maybe.
And Bob Brown is there. You don't expect to be necessarily to be at an ASCAC conference. And he says, they're bombing Africa right now. I'm like, what? Who? The Black president is bombing Libya. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm sitting at Howard and all this stuff. And what are we going to do? He's bombing Libya. There was no response. I mean, not no response, but you know what I mean. Like, There was no response. And it felt like, if we can't critique him when he's bombing Africa. And so it's sad that it didn't take that. It took, at least on some small levels, right? The emergence of this police violence and things of that nature to kind of get people to wake back up a little bit. But 2012, I'm at University of Pennsylvania, and they're honoring him. They're honoring Du Bois. And it just felt almost like, it felt circus-like to appoint Du Bois into a position posthumously. But they were.
You make a really good point about that too. Were you quoting somebody, or because you make a really good
quoting Tony Montero, because he was belatedly invited to that conference, which is crazy. You're doing something with Du Bois in Philly, and Montero's not on the top of the list of invitees.
But you made that his point was that now that communism is not the threat, now that you can bring him back. Because I think if I remember the timeline correctly, Morgan did something funky like that with him too, in terms of even when he was
invited,
when he was that kind of thing. So anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so it was just an odd kind of performative thing, performative in a negative sense for me, because while we should celebrate him, it just felt that the fact that you all didn't invite Tony Montero to the celebration at first. And, just trying to fit them into these particular holes, categories. It felt more about the scholars who were at that event than it felt about Du Bois. And, Dr. Montero ruined me for that kind of thing, because I took a seminar with him on Du Bois. And so he ruined me to accept that kind of thing, for accepting that kind of thing. I could see it for what it was because of Tony Montero. And, just being in that space is just, that coupled with the Obama era optimism kind of caused me to write that this really isn't about who Du Bois was. This is about how you all feel yourselves can be situated within the academy now that Du Bois is an ancestor.
So just very quickly, I'm not crazy. You did say here, and I don't know where it is on. It's in my Kindle copy, so it's hard to tell what
Okay.
exact page it is. But you said in reference to Sylvia Winter, her work reveals that this hegemonic assumption of liberal ontologies can be dangerous, locating much of her critique in the question of, quote, the human. And right, I think that's in the early pages of the book.
Right,
So
it is.
you're that overview of what you're saying about each of these figures, and that's sort of what I've taken away as a theme from what is happening that you're describing to Du Bois, what has happened just in general with Black thought and the concept of Black studies, and is such an important to me theme. Anyway, anyway. So I just
where I thought you were going was her essay Beyond Liberal and Marxist Feminisms, where she basically says, look, the whole premise of Western feminism in relationship to liberalism is to destroy man as the liber, or man as free, right? The whole premise of the Marxist interpretation of feminist struggle is to displace man as labor, right? And so one of the things that she's making a particular claim around is these particular visions perhaps need to go beyond just thinking about replacing man as, and actually think about a different way of being human than man.
Oh, damn. No, see, that's why I gotta have enough. We gotta do this again. I haven't gotten far enough and deep enough into each chapter. So there, that's
that essay, which is not as widely read as some of her other essays, to me is really important.
Yeah, clearly.
People think it's an outright attack on feminism, but it's really not. She's saying that these versions of feminism don't get us to a place where we can actually bring in a deeper conversation, which is really essential to thinking about, like, not just who we are, what we do, but also these questions of the very nature of existence, which she's always talking about, and how when we don't start there, we inscribe somebody else's answers every time.
And if I understood what I saw correctly in your chapter on Cedric Robinson, oh man, I think there's a connection here. I'm just not going to probably put it together properly. But you say something about how Robinson is approached that sounds similar to what you were just saying of Winter's critique about just simply replacing. In other words, something like Robinson is not just saying Black people are just use their thought to replace Marx. It is in of itself something to be dealt with. So
essentially,
elaborate, please. Explain or clarify, please. Yeah,
I made it so the Robinson connection is very important to the whole book. As you said earlier, I had the biography on Robinson.
Right.
And I think, was that the first time I was on the show? We talked about Black Marxism.
I don't think you had finished that book yet.
Oh no, I hadn't. In fact, I hadn't even signed the contract for that book. I didn't know I was going to write that book.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So here's the story. And I think I told the story a few times, but I don't know if you've heard it. I'm mostly teaching the book. I'm not really writing about it. He passes away, and some folks on Twitter give me the opportunity to actually write about him. And then one of those folks ends up, Kurt Newman, who's one of the editors, ends up sending it to Robin D.G. Kelly. And so me and Robin D.G. Kelly start having a bit of a dialogue around this, and he's doing the family research because he was the obituary. He wrote the obituary. And it's a really uphill battle because as close as they were, Cedric never really talked about his own life in that way. And so, to make a very long story short, this book of Black study actually is in the works as I am trying to transition from my research on the Howard protest. I had basically completed that research, was now drafting that book. And then I go ask Robin a question. It's a really simple question, actually. Like, what was Cedric's relationship to the National Conference of Black Political Scientists? That's something I wanted to know. Like, did he ever go to their conferences, engage their work? Because, you know, Mac Jones and them, Ron Walters, they're trying to execute something similar with relationship to the study of politics. Anyway, I finished a chapter on Robinson like 5 years ago. And I sent it to Robin because there was some biographical stuff that I wanted to check on. And he was like, well, maybe you should do something larger. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do anything larger. And then he says, you know, think about it. Because he says, I'm not going to be the person that writes Cedric's biography. And I don't know. Well, I do kind of know why. But to continue to make this long story short.
Hold up though. Wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wait. Hold up. No, I'm just playing. Like, I admit I'm very curious about that. Why he wouldn't be the one to do it.
Oh, well, I think it was like the closeness was too much for him. This is just me speculating.
That's
Forgive me, Robin, if that's not accurate, but
okay.
Yeah, I think there was a closeness. I think about, you know, my own elders and whether or not I could write something about them. Yeah. So
yeah.
There's that, but also I finished the chapter, sent it to him to get that, and he says, you know, write the book. And I'm like, that ain't my thing. That's not my thing. But a year later, a publisher approaches me and said, well, Robin sent us. It's like, oh, okay. And so that's really, you know, I talked to Elizabeth Robinson about the project and things of that nature. And so that's really how I got invited to write the Cedric Robinson biography. But I wanted to say that this was first. Like, Of Black Study was first. It was even before the Howard Protest book. And because it was first, it's the one that I thought the longest about. And so that chapter on Robinson is what I thought I needed to write, but it ended up being only a snippet of what I needed to write. And together with the biography, the difference is, I think, and, you know, shout out to Jared Ware and Joshua Breon from Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, because they had a way of seeing this that I didn't necessarily see. He said, this treatment is more about the terms of order than it is about Black Marxism. And that's kind of where I wanted to make a particular kind of claim. And that is, one, you have to read those two books together to get either of them, I think, to really fully understand either.
I did want to ask you about, I mean, you said one of the flaws that not everybody, but many people have in trying to place and assess and use Robinson is that they don't read everything. I know I'm guilty of that. I haven't read Beyond Black Marxism, and I haven't studied that book. I've read it, but that's not the same thing. So that's deep. Anyway, so yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So you know, it's the one book that people put down immediately right after they pick it up, and that's because part of it's the language. Also, part of it is one cannot see the immediate application of this to the Black liberation struggle. It's not immediate, right? For those who are reading for those particular reasons. And so it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, you know, sitting down and say, okay, let me just take a month and just focus on this, right? But one of the things that I was able to do by doing some of the research, really not even doing research, just going back to his other works, is that Robinson has not an obsession, but a deep interest in charisma as a concept. And for him, charisma isn't bad. Charisma is appropriated by bad actors. And he starts that engagement with Malcolm X. So his first article is Malcolm X as a charismatic leader. He then teaches courses on Black charismatic movements. He says the movements are more important than the leaders. Charismatic movements. And then so, why is he talking about charisma? Terms of order, which is his dissertation, takes the conversation around charisma back to its source in people's relationship to experiences that transform their lives. And whether that is religious ecstasy, whether that is someone, offering, or people offering each other the thing that allows them to survive. It's almost like a metaphysical experience that human beings have when they realize that life is meaningful, right? Kind of describing what people think they hear when they hear a charismatic speaker, right? Oh my God, this is so meaningful now. It changes my life, right? That notion, Robinson says, is at the center of political leadership, because the peoples who are structuring market societies, they need representatives to then convince the people that this is the best way to organize their own lives. And so what's the thing that the people have that these actors need in order to convince them that leadership is natural, right, is necessary? And that thing is charisma. And so politicians have charisma for a particular reason. And Max Weber and others talk about how this then, charisma then becomes part of the bureaucratic ethic of a particular society. And so what Robinson is saying, we have to challenge the myth of leadership, because people don't follow leaders because they believe in leaders. People follow leaders because they believe in charisma. And that to me was something that I felt had to be understood and has implications for how we think about Black radical movements, obviously, right? And so Erica Edwards writes about this as well. I'm about to blink on her title, Fictions of Black Leadership, I think is the title.
I got it.
Erica's a brilliant thinker. Just came out with a book that in fact, you should interview Erica, because her most recent book talks about how
Fictions of Charisma and Fictions of Black Leadership. Okay.
Thank you. Charisma and Fictions of Black Leadership. Her most recent book, The Other Side of Terror, talks about how the American war machine uses Black women, right? On the positive and the negative side. So we critiquing it, right? Black women are critiquing it, but also Black women are being forced to approve American imperial power through the mechanisms of visibility. So what's the relationship between Oprah and Toni Morrison? Really? It's not just choosing my books because you like. Anyway, all right. The Other Side of Terror. So the other move that Robinson then makes that I think is really critical. Well, there's two more moves. I'll just speak about one. And this is the relationship to Black Marxism. It's not simply, that capitalism comes out and is already racialized, and these things are already embedded in it, and then it becomes this force that everybody's struggling against right now. It is also the case that in order to have this form of capitalism have this power, it has to present itself as order. And how do we do that? Through political leadership. And so the relationship between political leadership, order, and the manifestation of the thing that we're fighting against is the fact that it appears as if it's natural, which is also important for us as people who are struggling against it. If we can get folks to recognize, and I think we do this, right? And I think people have done this and have recognized this, but if we can get people to realize that it's all actually a fiction, then that gives us a different confidence and different grounds from which to struggle. And the Black radical tradition has always, I think, understood that there's nothing sacred about this system. We'll blow it away. We'll figure out something else, right?
In
a dangerous moment where charisma is being, particularly Black leadership, and this is what Erica's book is about. Black leadership is then taking the political appropriation of charisma and trying to convince Black communities, and being quite effective in convincing Black communities that this is the only way. But what Robinson would say is they needed to do that because we were being effective in doing something else.
Right on. I mean, you have him asking, or you're asking, what if disorder is not chaos? I love that part. I love that.
Right.
What if disorder is not chaos? Disorder and chaos are not the same thing, or don't have to be. Anyway, I love
what's more chaotic than what's happening now? They literally are about to restart the planet. I mean,
right.
It's chaotic.
All right, so moving on, because I am going to have to leave.
Okay.
Closer to 2:30 or 2:40-ish. I could probably stretch it. Unfortunately, I messed up. This is all my fault. This whole day, I was off all day, and I messed up the whole day. And what's the problem is I've been off all day for a couple of weeks, so that's what's really messed up. So anyway, but so please forgive me, everybody, forgive me. And again, this is the first of what I hope will be at least maybe a whole bunch of them. But anyway, so because I got so many, there's so much here. I gotta at least bring up your chapter on Jacob Carruthers. Yeah. I will admit it may seem like it, check me on this, like at first glance, it's like that's an odd inclusion in this list of thinkers. I have mad respect for Baba Jake. I even had the pleasure of meeting him. I've always thought his presentation style was as deep and knowledgeable as anyone, but as accessible and friendly and humble. Intellectual Warfare is one of my favorite books. I mean, I thought with all due respect to everyone else involved, I thought the Asante book recently on Karenga did Jake a little dirty and leaving him, not enough, didn't give him, I was like, wait a minute, you talk about Chicago, and I was like, yeah. And then very lastly, as I was proposing to my now wife at the Great Pyramid in Kemet, that was exactly the time, unfortunately, where Jake passed, where he made his transition. Wow. So yeah, while I was in Kemet, he transitioned. So it was like a, I don't know, obviously bigger than that, but it was weird and odd and for me, but whatever. But so all that to say, I was very happy to see that he was in there, even as I'm saying I thought initially when I saw the name, I was like, wow, okay, that I wouldn't have expected that. So talk about Jacob Carruthers and why he factors for you so heavily in this book.
I read Carruthers before I read anybody else in here. So that's number one. But number two, I'm glad you mentioned intellectual warfare, right? Because that signals something really important. It signals the relationship between the continuation of a nationalist, African-centered approach to knowledge that I don't think gets enough intellectual attention. It doesn't get enough attention within Black studies beyond the route that Molefi Asante and others paved. It doesn't get attention beyond Black studies probably at all. And so it shaped me. So I can't not, right? I can't not. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't not. And so it's critical for me. But even beyond that, there is a similar relationship that Carruthers has to really two disciplines that mirrors the other folks in this book. I was very drawn to Carruthers' critique of political science when I first read him as an undergrad at Howard. He writes in the two pieces in Intellectual Warfare, an alternative to political science, and then thinking about European thought. And so that just stayed with me throughout my graduate school experience. It's like, who are the people that are helping us create the kind of space to maneuver differently? And then the work that he, Anderson Thompson, and others in the Chicago school did around Africana historiography, to me, that's critical, especially insofar as people who may or may not be involved in the academy or university as closely as we are, see the importance of history differently than the disciplinary approach to history that we do see in the academy. And sometimes the people in the academy try to appropriate that interest and say, no, Peniel, we're not talking about your history. We're talking about actual connections to the past that are not given in and through a particular narrative of American exceptionalism. In fact, this is what Anderson Thompson called entertainment history. We're not talking about, Black people don't want to be entertained by history. This is why I think that's part of the reason why there's this kind of animus towards these kind of movies, right? This is not about entertainment. It's about liberation. History for liberation, the past. And so how do you actually write that? How do you actually break from the disciplinary tradition of history and write history from an actual African-centric framework that is not about saying we were great, because this is not Carruthers' project. Carruthers' project actually, you know, has a critique in many respects of the kind of hierarchies and things of that nature that people like to latch on to the African past. He says it's not that we didn't have, there weren't people who were privileged. It's that privilege wasn't the way that they made decisions, right? And so how do we get to a point where we can actually write that clearly and develop a narrative that is actually clear around that? This is a very serious undertaking that Carruthers devotes his life to doing. And I think that needs to be talked about. It needs to be elevated, even as, you know, many of the people who may pick up this book will not expect to see that. But as he says, you know, African people must break the chains that link our ideas to European ones, right? And he is one of the peoples that I think he's one of the people that I think begins the process of that breaking, and also models it, as you said, in terms of his character. I think that's also critical for Black studies. Like, we have to also think about ourselves and how do we become models of good character. And that's something that takes a lot of work. And Carruthers kind of represents that. The other thing I like about that chapter, even within our African-centered communities, there's a lot of information that I, you know, took from his widow's work, Ife Carruthers, but also from his History Makers interview that talks about his background. His background, you know, going all the way back to his grandfather, who was great-grandfather, who was the founder of an all-Black town in Texas. His work as a student activist, his work in graduate school, like his dissertation is, he's attacking the notion of nonviolent civil disobedience in 1963, right? Like,
oh, damn.
Right at the core. And actually, I think it's published in 65 or so, somewhere in there, 65, 66. And so, but whenever he's writing it, the so-called transition from civil rights to Black power hadn't happened yet. And he shares that with Cedric Robinson, who's critical of the civil rights nonviolent approach in 1963. And so there's something about that. But also just the general disposition towards Western thought. To me, his notion of fundamental alienation is critical to understand. Like, you know, what is the relationship between knowledge, metaphysics, and how did Western thought sort of disaggregate those two things, and what are the implications for that? Because it's not that you got rid of God, you just made God something else, right? So anyway, I can go on.
Nah, man. So there's so many different. So like, all right. I'll save that one in case we have time, because I want to give you some room to breathe on this one. But I want to ask it. I'm going to ask this big broad thing, and then you do what you would. So because I just want to ask one more thing, and then so I don't want to rush you to answers. I'll give you some time and then to bring up whatever else you might want to bring up. But in your chapter about Robinson, you quote him as saying that Black studies is a critique of Western. I think you're quoting him, but the point is made that Black studies is a critique of Western civilization. So I wanted to highlight that as a transition into also asking you to talk about what you write about in the conclusion, which is also a reflection or discussion of Tony Cade Bambara, and what stuck out to me was your concluding your. So what I'm saying is, if Black studies is a critique of Western civilization, and then you're talking about what is being done with the punditry and the celebrity or what, you know, and so anyways.
So I love that you said this, because it gives me an opportunity to really talk about the context of that quote.
Okay. Good.
You know, it's Robinson's talking to an anarchist, like via an email interview. It's crazy. And it's interesting because C.L.R. James, he's actually quoting C.L.R. James by saying this. And if you go to the original C.L.R. James, in fact, I think this is now floating. Shout out to Zalika, sister, who is like, I think she's responsible. She would probably say I'm responsible, but the C.L.R. James quotes that are floating around about Black studies, is because I went and found the context for Robinson using the Black Studies as a critique of civilization quote, right? And what James says in that article is in the Black Scholar, CLR James interviewed by the Black Scholar, 1970.
Shout out to the Black Scholar, man.
I want to say 76. That might not be right. But in that article, and this is why, you know, research is important. But James says, in order for Black studies, and this is paraphrasing, in order for Black studies to actually be supported, the whole architecture of Western thought has to change. And so Robinson distills that into Black studies must necessarily critique that architecture, or Black studies is a critique of Western civilization. But there's a way to critique Western civilization. The pundit class is not critiquing Western civilization. They're asking for entrance into Western civilization. That's the critique. I'm not there. I'm not included. Or my inclusion makes me feel bad, or my lack of inclusion makes me feel bad. And so that becomes not a critique of the whole architecture of Western thought. It becomes, I ain't got no problem with the architecture of Western thought. I just feel some kind of way about it in this particular moment of punditry. And I think this is a distinction that I want to raise around the whole Ron DeSantis, Florida AP African American Studies conversation that's happening. Look at the defenses. I'm interested in the defenses, right? Whether it's on CNN, MSNBC, or whether it's in print, people are being interviewed all left and right. I get too many media requests a day for me to respond. I'm like, I'm not responding to a media request, because unless y'all give me an opportunity to write 2 or 3 paragraphs in response, you're going to misread this, because it's complicated. It's nuanced. And here's the nuance. Many of the people who are responding are simply saying that this is an attack on African American history. My colleague said that, you know, all we got to do is recognize that African American history is American history. And he says not recognizing that is un-American in and of itself. And I'm like, blown away. This is the response? Because
by the way, I'm 2 episodes in the new Hulu thing of the 1619 project, and that's the whole thing.
Another example, right? I could only watch the trailer, because the trailer ends saying that we have just as much claim to America as anybody else.
That's it. And it's just 2 hours so far of them making justify that claim. That's it.
Explains why she's at Howard in this moment in Howard's history. It also explains the ways in which this has been embraced by the liberal side of things, which obscures the radical critique that has always been there of this project, right?
And by the way, all this stuff about Howard, we take this off the table, because I actually have I have an application in at Howard somewhere. So let's chill on that wonderful institution and what maybe one day my colleagues.
Look,
go ahead.
I've been
it's
here.
True, though. I do. I actually do. But that's Go ahead.
I think it's important, because this is the response to this moment. It's like this retrenchment into us having a claim. Also, the ADOS movement, right? We have a claim to this, right? And that claim can only exist if one actually denies that there is a radical alternative that we've always also believed in. And so Black studies is the radical alternative to the argument that they're using to defend Black studies in Florida.
Wow.
And so the defenses are wrong. They're not wrong to defend, but the actual intellectual content of the defenses are wrong and have nothing to do with Black studies. And this is the danger that maybe Ron DeSantis and his team figured out, but they probably didn't. But this is also the thing. And, you know, lovingly, I worked on the AP African American Studies. Of course, there are many people, you know, that I respect on those writing teams, but there's a very clear attempt to compromise with certain ways of existing within the normative American academic landscape that Black studies really, in its origins and in its political impulses, should not and have not accepted. And the question becomes, can you teach that can you teach that in the high school system? That's what we're really testing. And I don't know.
All right, so man. Let me ask you real quick. I have to admit, I don't know, it's maybe even a year ago now. I don't even know how long ago it was, but I don't ever know what you mean when you do this, or when I used to see it. I don't even know if you're on social media like that anymore. I'm not, but I saw you tweet.
Oh my God.
All you put up there was racial capitalism. And I don't know if you had it in quotes or if you had like an emoji eye roll or something, but it was something like, I wanted to ask you, so I'm saving it for now, like in the context of your work and Robinson and his association and then the stuff that I don't know. So what is when you see racial capitalism being discussed popularly, I guess?
I think, because I don't have another hour.
Right. No, I'm not now. Not today, but you will. I promise you.
I mean, just in a quick nutshell, I think part of what, I talk about this in the book as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of what I see happening is people are attracted to the study of race, which is great. Let's study it. Let's study its imbrication with capitalism. And part of the problem with that is that's where it starts. And that's where it ends. And it's like, okay, race and capitalism. It's almost like, let's create a new term to talk about race and capitalism at the same time. And there's nothing resembling, wherever we locate the origins, there's nothing resembling any connection to that. And so I don't remember that tweet, but I do remember one of my other tweets where I basically said people just use racial capitalism to put a label on what they were going to do before they even encountered the term. And so when I see racial capitalism, what I see is I'm a scholar of race inequality in class, or whatever I am a scholar of. Let me use this term because everybody else is using this term. And then let me turn around and do what I was going to do before I ever heard of it.
Oh, dang.
I mean, that's what I see. That's how I see it.
But this is why I'm saying stay tuned, everybody, because it's coming back. That's why I'm saying it's coming
the hate
back.
Logo.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's coming back. I love it. And the same thing, even in passing, if I read it correctly, it felt like what I was even asking Frank Wilderson the last time he was here. Like when you said I think you used the word imprimatur of Afro-pessimism.
Yeah.
Like it's like, even whether people agree or disagree, like I read it as a new, I'm not even trying to be dismissive or disparaging by saying rebranding, but a rebranding of race first analysis.
So interesting, like,
what were you saying when you I don't know, go ahead. Yeah.
So there's like the term, just like with Marxism, right? There's the term and there's the concept, there's the person,
right?
The term, and then these things have lives after that, right? And so what's interesting to me, and this has nothing to do necessarily with the intellectual validity of Afro-pessimism, as much as it has to do with the way that there's a certain conversation in Black studies now that starts and ends with Afro-pessimism, as if there were no other variations of Black studies that ever existed. There was a time on social media, if you mentioned Black studies, people assumed 100% that you're talking about Afro-pessimism.
Oh, wow.
That was actually a time that happened. And that's really something that struck me, because these were mostly younger scholars who were learning about Black studies on the internet, because they're not being offered these courses in their universities for the most part, or they're being offered these courses through literature departments, comparative literature, right? And so for them, Black studies is Afro-pessimism. And so part of what I wanted to do with that little line is say, Afro-pessimism has the right to exist, right? But there are other conversations that have been had under the umbrella of Black studies that we also should bring into the conversation. So yeah, that's what I mean.
Listen, I rarely feel this bad about being the one to end an interview, but listen. So I apologize to you again, to the remixers in the audience who we're not going to have time to engage today.
Well, Jared and Josh had me for 3 hours, so
So I was going to say, I am going to, it's already going to be on the redesigning syllabus, the living document, as we sometimes say, these things are. The millennials are killing capitalism interview with you is definitely going to go on there, as are a whole bunch of their other work. I mean, I actually, you know, it's a little bit humbling to
the way that they read.
Interviews.
I mean, my God.
It's a little bit. But reading your work was a little bit humbling. I'm not going to front. I mean, for it, you know, sometimes it eases the pain when I compare, you know, my CV to others. I'm like, yeah, but I'm at an HBCU. I'm teaching 4.4s. Like, I don't have that. And then here you come with stuff like this. And I know there are others. I'm just saying, you know, but it is. So again, I want to end where I started. And I don't mean to sound condescending when I say this. I'm immensely proud of you for having been able to do this work in the context of where you are in the situation, the quality of it on its own, what you're inviting us to consider. I love all of it. I appreciate you for doing it, and congratulations. And I really can't wait until the next time you're here to talk more about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I don't take being here for granted. Thank you. I just say it like that.
It's an honor all the way around. So listen, thanks to you. Thanks to everybody else who was seeing this live, to those who will see this later. And my, again, deepest apologies for my scheduling error. As Fred Hampton used to say, we say peace to you because we know you're willing to fight for it. Thanks again to Professor Myers. Definitely get this book, and we will be talking much more about it, even maybe before you get back here, because there's a lot to get to. But anyway, I love it. Thank you. Congratulations. Peace until next time, everybody. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.